or manufacturing.
Although apparently they went crazy over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and it was the guys who were spending up big.
It's always the guys. I mean, it's just the big ticket items. It's the guys who are out on Thanksgiving weekend or Black Friday, and they're buying the high definition TVs or the electronics goods, which are the big ticket items. So men outspent women over the Thanksgiving weekend. I think they spent about $45 billion over the weekend.
Wow. Well, listen, the only woman that was out shopping big time apparently was Michelle Obama. She was spotted with $635 U.S. designer shoes on. What do you make of that?
Interesting. I mean, that's not a question that I've had posed to me before, to be honest.
But you know, I mean, she's part of the presidential couple that's been lecturing the American people. You can't live the way you used to. Are we getting mixed messages from?
Well, she's rent-free. I mean,
she is rent-free.
Yeah, I mean, not a great look. I mean, obviously, you know, been quite high profile in terms of changing some of the economic fundamentals of the American consumer, and got to practice what you preach. But you know, we'll see where that might change down the track.
She'll have to go back to the Gap and J. Crew to do her shopping.
Yeah, I would say so. A little more down home. All right, over in Ireland now, of course, they've got the bailout. How's that looking for the rest of Europe? What's the latest, Jeff?
Well, I mean, you had kind of Greece, and that struggled on for months and months and months. Finally solved that, and it seems to be relatively quiet on that front. But then, you know, Ireland was the next one. That seems to have been resolved by dipping into the kind of pension fund to help fund the overdraft facility, basically, that the European banks are putting out there. So then it moves on to Portugal and on to Spain. Spain is the elephant in the room. It's the fourth largest economy in Europe. It's got almost 21% unemployed. The banking system is relatively solid, unlike the Irish one, but they've had a huge amount of property developers go broke. I mean, the loans is something like 330 billion euros. I call it 700 billion Kiwi dollars. That's at risk from, you know, defaulting property developers. So there are concerns over Spain.
And Jeff, our annual trade surplus is way up to $1.2 billion, the best it's been since, what, the mid-90s? And apparently it's all thanks to the high dairy prices. That's got to be good.
Oh, it has got to. I mean, it is good. It's just one of those things is you don't want to be too dependent on one industry, you know, for your exports. So if we can get some manufacturing and some other things going in the economy, that would be better.
James, you wouldn't agree with that, would you? You love dairy.
Oh, I love dairy, but it would be good. It would be good to, you know, have a little bit more diversity around. And I mean, those numbers that we did see reflects what we have, what the New Zealand economy's been. Agriculture's been good, dairy particularly, but we've seen subdued demand here locally, and not as many people demanding international goods like the plasma TVs and that sort of thing.
Of course, the biggest meat processing company in New Zealand and one of the biggest exporters, Silverfern Farms, didn't do so well this time around, reporting losses of, what, $14 million? What does that tell you?
Yeah, well, it's been a difficult year. I mean, they've been dealing with high currency. They've seen their revenues decrease over the past 12 months, less stock available, and they've also gone through a big restructuring phase in terms of shutting down some of their plants. So I think their profits have been impacted by some of those factors, and you know they're going to be dealing with a high currency in the coming 12 months also.
And Jeff, the fact is that 1.4 million lambs apparently less on the marketplace now because of all the troubles they've had. What kind of impact is that likely to have on the overall economy?
I don't know if it'll have that big an impact on the overall economy, but certainly in places like Southland, it got hit pretty badly. You know, numbers will be way down for some of those farmers.
Meantime, Fonterra is buddying up with Nestle, going into Chile in a new joint venture. They want to do another kind of dairy factory, as I understand it. What do you think, James?
Well, I mean, South America, we talk about being a big agriculture producer. They're going to be a big consumer also of all products, whether it's meat or dairy, proteins. So dairy is a big growth market into South America. I think that's going to be beneficial to farmers here in New Zealand if we're able to be a part of that growth phase.
Meantime, the wool industry here is grappling with whether they join this new Wool Partners Co-op, and apparently they've extended the deadline, trying to hook some more farmers farmers in. What do your sources tell you about how that bid is going, James?
Well, it's, from what I read in the media, there's mixed reports. There's some that are obviously really positive about Wool Partners Co-op, some that seem to be quite negative. So the fact that it's being extended out gives people a little bit more time to understand what is going on, to get their governance in order to sign up and things like that. I mean, this is an ideal opportunity for farmers to get out there, and they've been through a difficult few years. It does seem like Wool Partners Co-op are trying to get things going, so farmers have got to decide whether they're on board or whether they're not.
Let's quickly talk about farm sales numbers. You're at a standstill around the country. Jeff, give us some of your wisdom on this.
Well, I'm not an expert on farm sales, but my feeling is that they're overpriced. If you look at what's happened, if you look at the banks in residential property, in a 10-year period, they trebled the amount of debt from 50 billion to 150 billion. So it's hardly surprising that house prices went up as much as they did, up until 2007. Again, we've seen in the farming sector, banks have been very willing to lend, and I just think that farm prices generally are overpriced compared with the income you can get off them.
And how long would you expect this trend would continue?
As long as it takes to get back to kind of more realistic numbers. I mean, my view on residential property is a 5 or 10 year game.
Wow.
Because you can't have a situation where, if you're looking at, say, farm prices, if incomes on farms are only going up at 3 or 4%, then how can land prices go up at 10% a year? It's not sustainable. So at some point there has to be a correction, or you need to increase the productivity on farms. I mean, that's laws of economics.
Thanks, gentlemen. Coming up after the break, will the merger between kiwi fruit packer Cetera Co-op and Eastpak go ahead now that the killer vine blight PSA is in the picture? And just like that iconic baking powder company, Edmonds, our Goodman Fielder profit sure to rise and rise. But first, a question for you in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. How much have British and American agricultural land prices risen in the past decade? The surprising answer when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how much have British and American agricultural land prices risen in the past decade? The answer? Farmland's risen between 90 and 100% in the last 10 years in the States and in the UK. Can't say the same for here, but something that has shot up here, Sika kiwi fruit revenue and profits, $110 million for 6 months to September. That's a 16% hike. And net profit jumped 35% to $11 million, all before PSA. James, not bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great result, for continued increases coming out of a recession. We've just talked about only small growth, but, some of the industries, particularly agriculture, we've talked about, have done really well. Now,
they were going to have a big merger, Cetera and Eastman, but they've put it off because of PSA. What are you hearing around the traps?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you've got a little bit of uncertainty around PSA, major outbreak, and it's uncertainty about what the effects are going to be. That's the core reason, I guess, for the deferment. And also has some implications on the valuation of those two businesses, because who knows what's going to happen down the track and what that's going to mean to revenues.
And Goodman Fielder is off to a good start this year, Jeff. They're doing well. What are you hearing?
I mean, it's a good, solid food business. I mean, apart from the base products that go into, a lot of food, they've also got breads and sauces and all sorts of other things. I mean, they're just staple kind of diets. It's kind of boring, steady as she goes, reliable income.
The main commodities for Goodman Fielder, of course, wheat, dairy, oil. Are we going to see prices going up for food around the world in supermarkets?
Well, potentially. It's interesting that we've seen the Chinese over the past week have indicated that they're going to put some controls on. Their Prime Minister's been quite open about that, and putting controls on everyday items. So everyday items for us, bread, milk, those sorts of things. So I think there are going to be some increases. Goodman Fielder have said commodities have had an impact on their business. The players with the strong brands are going to be the ones that come through this, and they of course do have some of these strong brands.
And Jeff, being a financial advisor yourself and a very senior one, there's now a new disciplinary committee that kicks off today, I understand. How is that going to help farmers and consumers?
Well, I mean, it should help consumers. Up until now, there have been little in the way of requirements to call yourself a financial advisor. So a lot of people, I mean, I've been a couple of weeks ago on a 3-day block course doing some of the papers required to be qualified from 1st of July next year. There were a number of people from share broking firms with 25 years experience. We're all in favour of drawing a line in the sand and setting some standards, and then hopefully those standards will raise over time, so we can get away from some of the appalling advice that's been given in the past, with finance company debentures being one example. So we're in favour of tougher guidelines.
Yeah, good. And what kind of penalties could financial advisors be subjected to if they get things wrong?
I think $10,000 is a starting point. For some companies, it could be up to $300,000. So, I mean, we have 46 advisors, and so if there was a problem with one of our advisors and it came back to, some issues through the company, then you're looking at some pretty hefty fines.
I think it's part of this whole backlash, if you like, looking at financial institutions and advisors. I mean, we've seen some terrible things in the rural sector, some of the companies involved, things that have apparently gone badly wrong. James, do you see us as kind of turning a corner on this now?
Well, particularly in terms of regulation and requirements, then we are starting to turn a corner, and then that's a great thing to, I think Jeff's pointed out that we need to sort these things out, and they are starting to get sorted out. So there's a lot of activity that's going to continue for a while, I think, but it does feel like we are starting to turn a corner and get things ironed out. But
bottom line, it's buyer beware, isn't it?
It's always buyer beware, but I mean, one of the things we have is a shortfall of savings, and if in the next budget, or before the next election, the government's looking at increasing our national savings, then people need to be assured, if it's KiwiSaver or wherever, that they're getting the right kind of information from people who are well qualified, and that hasn't been the case in the past.
All right, well, let's hope it's a brighter future going into 2011. Thanks, guys. Thanks to my guests, ASB Rural Economist James Shortall and Spicer's Senior Financial Advisor Jeff Matthews. We'd love to hear your feedback, so drop me a line on the website and remember to check out the weekly blog. We'll give the last word to Father Christmas with news that in the unlikely event your Christmas list this year includes every item listed in that classic Yuletide carol, The 12 Days of Christmas, be prepared to pay nearly $100,000 US. Trying to buy the 364 items repeated in all of the song's verses, from 12 drummers drumming to a partridge in a pear tree, will cost you almost 11% more than last year. So to save money, go for just one of everything. That would cost you just $23,000 US. Remember, gold prices are high. That's pushed the cost of 5 gold rings up 30% to $650 US, as is the cost of hiring entertainers. Not to mention the birds. 2 turtle doves will set you back $100 US, and 3 French hens will cost you $150 US. But good news, the 8 maids a milking was one of only 4 items featured that hasn't gone up in price. They'll cost you just $58 US. Bargain. Keep the faith. See you next time. On the first day of Christmas. Sing it, gentlemen. Come on, join in.